I think it's the foundation of civilization, basically. Families having an asset like Bitcoin and, lowering your time preference. The family basically values the future over the present, and parents have to save and sacrifice for their kids, passing down wealth, values, and discipline. And this basically builds a stable, productive society. It's as simple as that, and that's something that's been eroded and taken away from us by the fiat world that we live in. But people are waking up to this, and we're seeing I'm seeing a lot of good movements, I should say. I'm seeing a lot of people just waking up to it and taking their lives back, having more agency, and taking traditional values, conservative values, back into their own hands. And it's great to see, and I'm seeing that more than ever in Bitcoin circles, for example.
How are you doing?
Great, good to see you, Jordan.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a long time. We just kind of dived into this one. But yeah, the last time I saw you was in Bulgaria, I think it was, at the Crypto Revolution conference that Plamen put on.
It was a great conference, and it's barring the name, it was a Bitcoin only conference.
It was, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a deceiving name. But yeah, it was a great conference and some great speakers there. And I just remember your talk, because I think you gave two talks over
I
the
gave two
weekend.
talks. One talk was on sort of the synergies between monarchy and Bitcoin, and the other talk was just an update about Jan 3.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to dive in today.
Right.
Yeah, because most people, I guess, haven't. At first, I want to stay away from Bitcoin. We're going to dive into that in a second, but a little bit about you, your background, because we were just talking before you came on that I'm based in London and you grew up in London. And I guess a lot of people they haven't met a prince before in their lifetime. So yeah, how was it growing up, having that?
So yeah, I am a prince, but it's from a non-functioning monarchy in Serbia. The last time that Serbia was a monarchy the country was Yugoslavia, and that was when Yugoslavia had six states. It was Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Slovenia, and Macedonia. And then sadly, after the fall of, after the death of the dictator who abolished the monarchy, he died in 1980, then Yugoslavia fell apart. But my story, the family's, the dynasty, I'm from the Karađorđević dynasty, and that originates from Karađorđe, who led the first uprising against the Ottoman Empire in 1804. Serbia and the whole region, a lot of southern Balkan, Eastern Europe was under Ottoman Empire rule. We were essentially slaves under the Ottoman Empire for centuries. Then around 1804 exactly, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, I think that's four greats, he was voted into by a council of Serbs to be the leader of an army that will that will liberate Serbia from Ottoman rule, and he was successful. That was the first uprising. There was an uprising about 15 years later, but then we were essentially the first ever democratically elected monarch, and so I mean there was the other uprising was arranged by Obrenović, and there was another dynasty, the Obrenovićes, and it was basically Serbia was led by both dynasties back and forth. I'm not going to go into the details, but then by 1903, that's when the Obrenović, by the end of the 1800s, so by the beginning of 1900s, they were actually there was regicide, they were assassinated. It wasn't the Karađorđević fault, but then the Karađorđević came to power in 1903 again, and that was my great-great-grandfather, King Peter I, and he was a heroic leader. He led Serbia through to the two Balkan wars, liberating Kosovo, because Kosovo was always Serbia. Kosovo is Serbia. I mean, I don't have to get into those details. Then led Serbia into the First World War, because the First World War, people know the history that Gabriel Princip was the Serbian who assassinated Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, and that's what sparked the First World War. Obviously, there's much more nuanced than that, but Serbia actually defeated the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire in the beginning of the First World War. A tiny Serbia up against a huge Austrian-Hungarian Empire, mainly because Peter I was a very trained leader. He was in the front lines of battle and stuff, and he was an incredible leader. So he had a lot of practice, and so he was able to take down the Austrian-Hungarian Empire for that moment. Anyway, when Austro-Hungary kind of fell apart, that led that some of the states that were part of the Austro-Hungary, so Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, parts like that, which were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, then we unified them, and that's what led to the creation of Yugoslavia. First, it was the kingdom of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbians. Serbians, Croats, and Croats, and Slovenes. I forget which way around it is. And that then led to the creation of Yugoslavia, and it was a monarchy ruled under my great grandfather, King Alexander I, and sadly he was assassinated through 1934, the first assassination ever caught on camera, and he was assassinated. 1934. My grandfather was too young to become king. He was 13 years old, so there was a caretaker king, Prince Pavle, which was King Alexander's cousin, who took care of who took care of Yugoslavia up until 1941, when my grandfather became of age. But at that point, it was the Second World War, a lot of horrible ideologies flying around, communism and all that. And sadly, the royalists in Yugoslavia, they lost against the partisans. So the Chetniks were the royalists, the partisans were the socialists, the communists. And that's when communism took over Yugoslavia, and then by 1945, my grandfather was exiled. My father was born at that time as well, but in London. So here's when London comes in. My father was born in Claridge's Hotel in 1945, and Churchill designated that the room that he was born in, room 212, would be Serbian Yugoslav soil for the day when he was born.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite historic.
Yeah.
And then so my father was born in exile, and so just going back to a point where communism, they took away all our private property, and not just the royal family, but many individuals. Yugoslavia, I keep on saying Yugoslavia was quite a wealthy country back then. Under the monarchy, under the kingdom, Yugoslavia was very wealthy. There was a lot of assets, people were asset rich, a lot of jobs were being created. It was doing really well. It was like with the 6 states, three different religions, we were like a little empire, and it had a lot of weight back then. And Tito continued that after, when he stole it, when he took it away from us, and Yugoslavia still held its ground under communist dictatorship. But Yugoslavia was created by the kingdom, and all the good things were still the remnants of the kingdom. But sadly, when this is where monarchy, the idea of monarchy comes in, is that under dictatorship, there's no succession plan, and this all failed after Tito died. I was born in 1982. I have a twin brother. We were born in the States. My father moved around with my mother, and they lived in Brazil. My mother's Brazilian. She's a Brazilian princess. That's another story. I'm not going to go into those details now.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
you don't have to.
Well, so my mother's actually a Brazilian princess. She's direct descendant of my great grandfather was the last emperor of Brazil. Brazil had 2 emperors, Pedro the First and Pedro the Second, and that similar situations where monarchy was abolished there. I won't go into the details, but he was very anti-slave trade, and he tried to get rid of slavery, and he managed to do that. But after the monarchy was abolished, and as a result of him trying to get rid of slavery, the monarchy disappeared because a lot of slave owners were the rich class, the ruling part of the ruling class, so they didn't like that. Anyway, another story. But yeah, I was my father. I was born in America, in Washington, and then my parents separated. I moved to Spain with my mother and my twin, my older brother. My older brother was born in America, in Chicago, 1980. And then I moved to London with my father to live there with my father and stepmother around 1985. 87, sorry, 1987, 88. And then I was educated most of my life in London, kept on going back to Seville to see my mother. And yeah, so then by 2001, we were allowed to, 2000, Milosevic was ousted in Serbia and Yugoslavia, and that was the fall of his sort of regime. And then by 2001, my father and stepmother moved to Belgrade, and they moved into the royal palaces, but they're still to this day, we are sort of tenants here. They're still under the Confiscation Act. Still state owned. Obviously, that's not correct, but that's the way it is over here. So they've resided here since 2001, and then I stayed in London most of my life. I mean, I studied 1 year in Spain, studied 1 year in Switzerland, and I worked 1 year in Cyprus. But otherwise, I stayed in London and worked the last 10 years before moving back to Serbia. I moved to Serbia when after marrying my wife, 2017. We had our son 2018, and then by 2020, when the whole pandemic hit, we we decided to move to Belgrade because my job went online. You know, I'm one of those. I'm part of the laptop class, and and I thought, I was a week into working at home remotely, and I realized I could be doing this anywhere in the world. So I went into the living room. My wife was playing with our son. I was like, "Hey, we're moving to Serbia finally." What do you mean? Oh yeah, we could be anywhere right now. So I could finally take my job to Serbia. So I was like, fantastic. So within 2 months we moved, and that was 2020, and that's when I discovered Bitcoin 2017. But became a maxi around 2020, 2021, when the whole COVID hysteria happened. And I was working traditional finance, in legacy finance, and I thought I knew all about finance, but COVID and Bitcoin proved me wrong. So the combination of those two and all the weird hysteria that was happening during that time woke me up to a few things. And I delved deep into Bitcoin, picked up a copy of the Bitcoin Standard, joined Bitcoin Twitter and everything. And next thing I know, I'm like, wow, okay, I get it now. So I sold all my shit coins and I became a maximalist. And then by 2022, 2022. So I'm rambling on my history over here, but by 2022, my wife and I, when we moved back here with our son, my wife and I were quite active. We lived downtown. We didn't live in the palace. We were busy doing a lot of PR work. We were traveling the country, being busy, meeting people, trying to give people a voice, trying to make a difference, do some good PR for our family. And in Serbia, the Karađorđević family is quite well received. Yes, there's been 80 years of propaganda against us, but a good 30-40% of the community. There's a lot of respect still for the family. About 30-40% of the country would like to see the monarchy restored here. The rest of the population, bar maybe 10%, are sort of indifferent. So yeah, it's not looking too bad in that way. But that's another story. So we traveled the country. We were doing a lot of work with people. We were just showing up and being there for the people. And next thing we know, we were invited to one of the biggest talk shows, the biggest talk show in Serbia, which is the Ivan Ivanović show. We were guests there. This was beginning of 2022. And that's when the host, Ivan Ivanović, I got to meet him 3 or 4 days before. He lived on our road, which was convenient. We had coffee with him, and he understood that I was a Bitcoiner. And we were sort of getting to know each other. So then 3 days later, when we did the recording for the show, he was asking me about my current work, which was legacy finance. And then he interrupted me, asking me about if it's a good time to talk about crypto. And then I corrected him and say, no, it's not crypto. It's all about Bitcoin. And then I went about one or 2 minute spiel about Bitcoin. And when that aired, a few days later, that went viral. And then next thing I know, I'm on podcasts. I'm on my first ever podcast with Daniel Prince. I'm on Safedean's podcast, which was mind blowing. He actually reached out to me on Twitter saying, Your Highness, I'm so glad you're a Bitcoiner. Do you know that Bitcoin and monarchy have synergies and stuff? I was like, yeah, I'm starting to realize that. And I went on his podcast to talk about that, which is amazing. And next thing I know, I was invited to Miami Bitcoin conference in 2022. I met Samson. He just started Jan 3 and he's like, would you like to work for me? Didn't think twice, and I joined Jan 3, and I officially joined Jan 3 later in 2022 and left legacy behind, and here I am today speaking to you.
It's such a good story, and like, because before we jumped on this call, I rewatched that clip, that interview, and because I remember when we were in Bulgaria, someone showed it to me.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen it before, and it's so good that he just asked, should we go to crypto, I think is what he says. And you're just like, no, not crypto, but Bitcoin.
Is now a good time to talk about crypto? And I was like, no, not crypto, Bitcoin.
Was that like an active decision? You were like, okay, I'm going to let the world know now about Bitcoin, or did it just come out?
It just came out.
Yeah.
He said crypto, that it's like it was an non-confrontational trigger. Because I was like, I need to correct him. Not crypto, Bitcoin. And that set me off. And that's with Daniel Prince. He was emceeing the second day. That's when I did the Jan 3 presentation. And before I did the presentation, or just after the presentation, he's like, okay, so I asked the organizers to do this last minute, but here's the clip.
That's where I see. Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah, Daniel Prince is fantastic. I got to give props to Daniel Prince. Since we're in the UK, he's moved back to the UK as well. I don't know if you probably heard about that.
Yeah.
So big props out to Daniel Prince. He really was. He took me under his wing when I came out. When I came out, and he introduced me to a lot of people, and thanks to him, really, I got a good introduction into the Bitcoin maxi world. And we met up in Miami, and we stayed in an Airbnb together. Him and Andre is one of the guys, the guy who the founder of Free Madeira, and who organized the Free Madeira conference.
Yeah.
And it was just we had a really good time, our three together. Andre is the one who introduced the president of Madeira to Miguel to Bitcoin, and he was there. Miguel came as well. And we first met at a basketball game in Miami at the FTX arena.
Oh, wow.
We were guests to I don't know whose contact it was, but we were in one of these boxes upstairs. It was quite surreal. Drinking some beers, eating some corporate sushi. talking Bitcoin. It was fantastic.
Wow. Yeah, I know Andre well. What he's done there is fantastic. Yeah. It is phenomenal. So at the moment, I don't know if I'm getting the wording right, but how's your time split now between, would it be like family/royal duties, and so it's like Jan 3?
As I said before, there's obviously it's obvious that the monarchy is not non-functioning here. It's not part of the system, but we are recognized by a lot of the population as the royal family. So recently, my wife and my family and I, our family grew. We had a daughter in November 2023, and when we moved into the palace by September last year. Not inside the main palace, but in a house. I say small house. It's a thatched house cottage in the grounds. It was the first building built in the property that my great grandfather King Alexander bought with his private money, personal money, and it was the first house that was built where he lived a couple of years when he oversaw the completion of the palace here, of the first palace, and then the second palace, the White Palace, was completed, but after his death. But yeah, so now our lives here have. I work for Jan 3. That's one of the things I do. But at the same time, we are invited to a lot of places. We appear here and there. A lot of people call our attention, for our presence, and I try and organize meetings here at the palace now to try and get things happening, introduce business contacts. We're trying to get, we're just trying to get growth happening. We're trying to get people, we're trying to move stuff here in a positive way. My wife and I recently opened up a foundation. We're just getting going right now. It's a foundation that's going to be linked. It's going to be linked to try and to preserve cultural heritage, but also to try and reverse the brain drain in this country and create jobs. And it's a very broad mission, and basically it's we have a vision and we're trying to make it happen, and it's a big task, but we're really up for it. And it starts with small steps, and the small steps are introduction meetings, and we are slowly gain some momentum. And we really want Serbia to be prosperous again, and for it to work, for that prosperity work for the people. That's part of that is actually being financially literate and understanding the fiat, the perils of the fiat world, the fiat system, and that's why I'm a Bitcoiner, really. So,
yeah, it's hard to know when to introduce Bitcoin, because like a lot of people need to know the problem first, right? As you were just saying, the problem with the fiat system. So when it comes to that work, are you doing anything in terms of Bitcoin related stuff within Serbia, or is that just a step too far?
It's no, I'm trying to move forward with mining here. There is mining already happening, but not much. We have great potential geothermal electricity here, but the issue with geothermal is that it's expensive to get geothermal happening. It's expensive to dig that hole and hit the hot part first go, and that has I don't know 70-80% success rate, which is high enough, but that essentially could cost millions, and that initial investment is hard to come by. But if you couple it with Bitcoin mining, bootstrap Bitcoin mining to it, it becomes much more economically feasible in the short term. And given that the fiat system makes us all very short-termism, that no one really looked towards. We had some projects in geothermal here a couple of decades ago, but they fizzled out. I actually met the person who, a scientist, I would call him, incredible geologist stroke oil driller stroke scientist who's invented so many things, like a crazy mad scientist, amazing ideas, too far ahead for his time. And he was the one who led the operations of drilling these two massive geothermal projects down somewhere down in Serbia. And they never went anywhere. They never led to anywhere because the economics wasn't there. So my aim is to try and get those projects happening again, not just in Serbia, but also in Republika Srpska, which is the Serbian autonomous part of Bosnia Herzegovina. They have a lot of surplus energy as well, not just geothermal potential, but they have a lot of hydroelectricity, and they're exporting more energy than they are importing. That to me is a signal that they can use that as well to start stacking sats and using that money made from their energy surplus to fund more projects and infrastructure, which is one of the joys of what Bitcoin mining can do.
Yeah, and it feels like there's a slight narrative change as well. So I had Eric Hersman on the podcast, who's one of the co-founders of Gridless. I don't know if you're aware of them.
Yes, wasn't this something I just saw on Twitter X? Yeah, on BBC. Yeah, they actually talk positively about Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, and everyone's like falling off their chairs. Like putting the BBC with positive Bitcoin mining doesn't seem like we've just never really seen this before.
I hope it's not a one-off.
I know, but what they're doing is incredible as well. Is just capturing that stranded energy from rivers through hydro, and then benefiting the whole of the community around by enabling them to monetize fully that water that's flowing past them and give them electricity at the same time, which is incredible. And people are now, it feels like waking up to this side of Bitcoin.
Right.
Because this is something, the reason why I asked about Serbia is, so I just presented to the Scottish government around Bitcoin. And one of the elements was energy, because we're in a very similar situation that we've got so much renewable energy in Scotland. I'm in London at the moment, but I'm originally from Scotland. And it just seems such a wasted opportunity. And it's just about educating around the benefits of mining.
And that's the hard part, is educating, because we understand the problem, and we see this, we have the solution, but it's just getting other people on board. It's not easy. Just like understanding Bitcoin for me was was not a straightforward process. It came in different stages. And so,
yeah,
and that's people for like ourselves. I say we're probably more open-minded than the rest of the population, or maybe we're lucky. I don't know, or maybe a mix of both. But then having to educate a whole industry to catch onto that idea is not easy at all. And that's the challenges that we face at Jan 3. But it makes sense. I mean, really, you can have these new financial instruments, and that's one of them is a Bitcoin bond, a bit bond, which can come in different forms. But I think the one tied to mining is incredible, because it's how what Samson designed for El Salvador, the volcano bonds, which are yet to come to effect. But it's almost stupid that countries who have a surplus of energy, who have excess energy, who have potential for energy, are not exercising this incredible opportunity. Also, credit to Max Kaiser. I think he came up with the idea as well. Yeah, so it's essentially, so you, for example, like in Scotland, you have surplus renewable energy, or energy that hasn't been tapped yet. But let's say you raise a bond of initial capital, let's say £1 billion. £500 million will go straight into buying Bitcoin itself, and the other £500 million will go into building the infrastructure of the mining operation. And let's say the bond has a 10-year duration, so that's over 2 Bitcoin cycles. And every year, after like a year or two, they've built the operation, or whatever, however long it takes. And every year of the bond has a token of however much percent, depending on the interest rate, pays back. And by the end of the 10 years, when you get the payment back, you get whatever the initial investment is plus whatever Bitcoin gains. And this is it's just an easy instrument that can really start a lot of infrastructure projects, and you're going to get so much money in return, and you're just going to boost the infrastructure projects, anything that bond can pay for, whatever the contract is laid out in the contract.
Do you think we're going to see? Do you think this is going to become a big trend going forward with the bonds? Because we've also seen the US Treasury bit bond proposal as well happening 2 weeks ago. Of course, you had Samson shouting this maybe 2 years ago with El Salvador.
It was but 2021 they came up with the idea. Wow. I believe 2021.
Time goes back.
When you structured it, though, it was Bitcoin price was high, rates were low, interest rates were low. So the given now the interest rates are higher, but Bitcoin price has gone up now. It works. I guess it depends on the interest rate environment, but at the end of the day, if you structure it according to how much the Bitcoin gains are, and if you take the CAGR, the annualized return of Bitcoin over the last 5 years, and just project it a little bit lower for the next 5-10 years, it just makes sense.
It's just sticking on, the nation state side of things. What's your view on the US strategic Bitcoin reserve, and did you see it coming so fast?
Not so quickly, no. He ticked a lot of boxes very quickly with that, freeing Ross Albright within like the second or third day of his of taking office in January. That was fantastic. And then the chaos he created by announcing the so-called digital asset strategic reserve at the beginning, and a lot of us were just like, what, no. But that's big. That's what Trump does. Trump, the way he negotiates, his art of the deal is he creates a bit of confusion to start with, which gets people talking, people complaining and stuff, and then he settles for something that people didn't really expect, or we kind of expected. At the end of the day, if you drill down to we kind of did at the end of the day, however long it would take, it would have been Bitcoin only at the end of the day. But it happened very quickly. From saying, yeah, we're going to have a digital asset stockpile, which is going to be based with all these shitcoins plus Bitcoin. People like Bitcoin is like, no, what the hell's going on over here? And then a few days later, it's like, yeah, Bitcoin only strategic reserve. And
it was interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was interesting just to see how all the major players in all the exchanges came out to that news as well. So you had like Brian Armstrong, the Winklevoss, the Kraken CEO, I can't remember his name, but they all came out and said, no, this is wrong, and
exactly.
You should be doing Bitcoin only, which is
exactly
huge.
what Trump and his team wanted to surface is, yeah, they just to let people talk about it. You shine a light on the problem, and the problem exposes itself. And it worked. I mean, I say that, but then Trump is releasing Trump coin and all that as well. But I understand that, you're in a position of power, you do something, you want to get, this is the flaws of democracy. You want to make as much of the moment as possible in those 4 years that he has. And he's obviously going to release a Trump coin, and to bank for him and his family. He can. Why not? Not that I would do it, but that's the incentive structure of fiat right there.
Yeah.
And I think it's totally wrong. I don't think he should have done it, but you can understand it. If not him, someone else would have done it.
Yeah. How is it for you at Jan 3? How has it changed the landscape of nation state adoption now? Because it's very... I was speaking to someone else about this the other day on a podcast, and it was always... It felt bottom up. And it was like you had El Salvador, you had Bhutan, you had the smaller countries adopting Bitcoin. But now we've just gone from that straight up to the highest power.
The highest power is adopting.
But how does that change? And what effect does that have in conversation?
It's a tough one to answer, because I think there was more activity happening, more attention after the release of the Bitcoin ETFs at the start of 2024. Not saying that this is much more bullish right now, but the problem is with this is that people associate Bitcoin, people are now associating the legacy media, the mainstream, associating Bitcoin with Trump. And that's not a good thing. That's not going to last forever, but it's not a good thing. So the mainstream are dismissing it completely. You're not seeing retail talking about Bitcoin like they did during the 2021 cycle. You're seeing little Bitcoin searches. I'm not seeing it at all in my groups of friends talking about it, and it's still very negative, the sentiment with Bitcoin because it's associated with Trump, and a lot of the people I'm associated with are still stuck in that world, I guess, in that when there's the levels of TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, is still very high. And not that I'm a big supporter of Trump. Obviously, I prefer Trump over what they had before. I think Trump is doing a lot of good things, but he's far from perfect. And, there's a lot of things that I would question that he's doing, but there's a lot of things that I don't question. I think he's doing fantastic. The tariffs, for example, I don't think that's a good way of going about doing things, but I understand why he's doing it. That's his way of doing things. But anyway, so yeah, going back to your question, is the consequences of what America has done just now are huge, but it has not. I don't think it's been fully priced in yet. I think the issue is once now it's passed clearance of Congress and the House has voted in, which I believe just happened earlier this week. Then once they haven't started stacking yet, they still have a reserve. They have a stockpile from seized coins, mainly from Silk Road and other cases. Once they start stacking, once you start to see it transparently stacking, then I guess that's going to be a different issue. I think the people are waiting for that, maybe.
Yeah. No, I'd written down here. Someone said to me the other day, "Orange man bad," and that's exactly how it feels. Is now, and it's not a good thing that people are associating Bitcoin with someone political or a political party, because
Right.
then that just alienates everyone else.
Exactly.
And Bitcoin is like apolitical. It should be. But we've almost gone from left leaning, Bitcoin being associated with left leaning, to now all the way to right leaning. And that puts off so many people, and they think that, like Trump coin, that they're just in it for like associated with the scam, essentially. And that's kind of what Trump coins muddied the water as well.
Yeah, that didn't help. And Trump, as I said before, didn't help, but I understand why he did that, but it did not help, and he shouldn't have done that. Yeah, Bitcoin is apolitical, and I always say this. Many people say this, that Bitcoin doesn't care about politicians, but politicians should care about Bitcoin, and so just so happened that Trump is caring about Bitcoin, but it just so happens that Trump is that character that's either loved or hate. He's the Marmite of politics.
Yeah.
So. But it's still at the end of the day, America doing it. You take Trump away, and America are doing it now. They're going to be stacking eventually, and that's incredibly bullish news. And it's not really the thing that Bitcoin was designed to do, but it is at the end of the day. Bitcoin is money, and if the biggest superpower in the world is now embracing it, that shows that it's credible. But yeah, just saying that at the end of the day, what people have talked about in X and stuff, it's like the real strategic reserve is you personally stacking it, is you coming to terms that you need to hold on to an asset that's immutable, that cannot be debased away by a centralized authority, and that's your strategic reserve power, your individual strategic reserve power, and that's the most important thing, and that's Bitcoin being bottom up. The top-down thing is just because people are paying attention slowly, and those now that America are doing it, it's going to have ripple effects, and I'm using what's happening with America to try and raise attention to some leaders, regional leaders in the Balkans, and it's still not having quite the attention I would like it to have. But I think soon there will be that dominoes of nation state adoption and game theory taking off.
Yeah. And I can imagine, so just my example, and then I want to hear what the conversations that you're having. But my example with Scotland, so I presented to the Scottish government, and unfortunately it was a few days before Trump announced this strategic reserve. But I then went back with my formal proposal after, because they wanted it all laid out, and it gave me ammo essentially. And I just said, the US have just done this. Like, this is an executive order that's just been signed, and it differentiates Bitcoin and digital assets, because unfortunately the government are still viewing it all as a whole, and that's where they really struggled with my presentation. So just by doing that, it really advanced my conversations with my country, because I can say, this country, like the US, have done this, and that then makes them listen. And it was really powerful for me to be able to go with that information, because you're right, game theory just kicks in, and they're like, oh, okay, we need to be actually, it's not just some bald Scottish guy talking about this now. There actually is other things happening. How has it helped your conversations as well?
Yeah, it's as you said, and well done with your work in presenting to the Scottish Parliament. That's great. That's great stuff. Yet, like you, it's given me ammunition. It's like you put the links into a message and say, look what America's doing now. I told you about this a couple of years ago. We should have moved 3 years ago, but it's not too late now. Let's go. The reply is mainly like, yeah, this and that still, but yeah, we're paying attention. Okay, well, you're not really paying attention. We still have time. And it makes me more confident. But I then go back on the whole thing that's that people associating too much with Trump. But that's going to disappear with time.
Yeah, 100%. And it was inevitable, but it's just fast tracked it essentially. Yeah. Okay, enough about the US, all of that. Let's kind of bring it back to. I wanted to ask, because I think there was something in your presentation about monarchies in Bulgaria, about historically your family being associated with like centralized power, but then you're advocating more for self-sovereignty with Bitcoin. And so how do you see these two fitting together?
I think it's important to see what the synergies are between monarchy and Bitcoin. And the two main topics, I should say, are low time preference and strong private property rights. And I think it's great to talk about private property rights, strong individual property rights or private property rights. We all understand why Bitcoin is associated with strong private property rights, but why is monarchy associated with that? Because a monarch, and I'm going to talk about it in its purest form, monarchy in its absolute form, is that an absolute monarch is essentially the owner of the government and the owner of the country, so to speak. So his or her interest is to run the country like a business. So they want to be in the business for as long as possible. So in order to be in the business as long as possible, they need to have their subjects. I hate saying the word subject because it has a negative connotation. They need to have their citizens to be happy. And for citizens to be happy, they need to have strong private property rights. If they don't have strong private property rights, then there's a big chance that they could rebel and overthrow the monarchy, and goodbye family, goodbye succession, goodbye ruling. So how do they have strong private property rights? Is what they tax their citizens, their people, as little as possible, leaving as much as possible for their next generations and the generations to come, for millennia. They basically have to take as little as possible today to leave as much as possible for generations to come. So that's by making sure that people are taxed very little or not taxed at all, and that people are able to gain wealth easily. So to some extent, it allows for some freedoms, a lot of freedoms within that country. Now, I understand that people associate absolute monarchies or monarchies with dictatorships, but I think it's a subtle but huge difference. That the dictatorships we talked about before very, very briefly have no succession planning, and dictatorships are essentially tied into an idea of some sort of oppressive ideology, whereas a monarchy is it's much more natural and has much more natural order associated with it. That a monarch will actually signal strong, not just strong private property rights, but also it will be closely tied to the church, and will always advocate for strong family values, and that's much more healthy with society. And then the other idea is that also ties in nicely to low time preference, that family and religion is the exercise of low time preference, and so is Bitcoin, and so is a monarchy, that they have to make decisions that last millennia to come. I mean, for years to come. So any bad decisions they make could reflect badly on them, but not just on them, on their children and children's children. So they have to weigh in a lot of factors, and they can't move very quick. They have to. I mean, they can move quickly when they make up their minds after good discussions, but it's not like in a democracy. So when you compare it against a democracy, which has 4 or 5 year election cycles, people get voted in, and they have to do as much as they can in those 4 or 5 years. And they're essentially not owners of the government; they're caretakers, and so they're going to extract as much value from that time as possible. meaning that they're going to be favoring themselves and their families and the people that they're surrounded by, because their time is in that office is finite. So they're going to do what they can to either stay in power or to extract as much as they can in those 5 years, and then that cycle gets repeated again every 5 years. So over time, that creates a short-termism, and it creates a world of instant gratifications and all that sort of stuff, and it has detrimental effects on society, because with time, the state becomes much more concentrated and becomes much more authoritarian, and tyranny starts to take form, and people's private property rights start to get eroded away, because people get voted in by wanting to tax another group of people, and it creates a situation where we are today, where we're seeing that there's too many divisions in society, and democracy is not really the freedom concept that many of us were led to believe it was when we were educated as children.
Yeah, and I talk about this quite a lot as the 4-year cycles or 5-year cycles we have in the UK of the political is just going from one party to the other, and it's just bouncing off, and exactly what we were talking about earlier, with the administration in the US extracting as much as possible at the moment,
right?
Whilst they are in office. And it's so important to understand the lowering of your time preference. And I think when you understand Bitcoin, it does something to you of like, you're then thinking for the future, essentially. And I liked what you said there about taking as little today for future generations, which is completely opposite of how we are operating today in our current financial system, because it is gaining as much as possible right now at the detriment of future generations.
Right, exactly.
When you've mentioned succession plan a few times, what is that, and like what does that look like?
You mean like succession plan, like how a monarchy?
When it comes to a monarchy, sorry.
Well,
yeah.
it's just it's just simply that that you need to have stability and continuity going into the future, and the only way that can happen is through family planning, so to speak. That it's a family is the most natural thing in the world. As humans, we have to procreate, and in order to procreate healthily, we need to have a nice health. We tend to do it best when we're in partnership with somebody, and we essentially lower our time preference for our children to grow up and to hand over the reins to them, and that's what ensures a stable society going into the future. So really, a monarchy, and so if you take it away from the absolute sense, even in a more constitutional sense, where most of its powers are removed, it does act like a backbone, like the spine of society, and is that it holds society up as a way of that continuing of the continuation of society through an example of a royal family, which is essentially the a symbol of the nation's tradition and patriotism. And where am I going with this? So basically I think this the idea of succession is that it adds stability and continuity.
Nice. Yeah, it's well, I think on that note, let's just wrap up the conversation there. And that was it was amazing to have you on. And I think you laid that out perfectly, because I think you're right that people don't see monarchies and Bitcoin really fitting together. But the way that you just described it, of course it does. Like, there's so many synergies between the two, and it's really important, I think, to understand that aspect of it.
I think it's the foundation of civilization, basically. Families having an asset like Bitcoin and, lowering the time preference, the family basically values the future over the present, and parents have to save and sacrifice for their kids, passing down wealth, values, and discipline. And this basically builds a stable, productive society. It's as simple as that. And there's something that's been eroded and taken away from us by the fiat world that we live in. But people are waking up to this, and we're seeing I'm seeing a lot of good movements, I should say. I'm seeing a lot of people just waking up to it and taking their lives back, having more agency, and taking traditional values, conservative values, back into their own hands. And it's great to see. And I'm seeing that more than ever in Bitcoin circles, for example.
Yeah, I'm seeing it as well, and I'm also seeing a lot more new people realizing it, because their problems getting worse as well. Especially being in the UK, at the moment, it's not. We are on a very downward path. I want to say. So I'm seeing more people realize a problem is there and look for a solution.
Right.
And luckily, we now have a solution to this.
And I'm not speaking out against saying that democracy is bad. I'm just saying that it has its flaws, and there's better ways of doing democracy. We just have to look at places like Switzerland, where they have direct democracies. We don't have a perfect system. No. But as Bitcoiners, maybe we are tending to move towards a more of a natural order, libertarian society. But we must never forget about the value of what family does to organize and discipline us and bring and instill wealth and value for the future.
Amazing. What a note to finish on. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jordan. Great to be here, and happy to come on again if you want.